안녕하세요. 매일매일 운동하기를 실천하고 있는 동타 왕코입니다. 영상은 매일 안 올리죠. 솔직히 운동도 매일 안 하고 있습니다. 자, 오늘은 3월 7일 월요일입니다. 요 근래 날씨가 너무 좋아요. 제가 어제 행궁동을 갔었었는데 차를 끌고 갔거든요. 와, 진짜 행궁동이 너무 핫해요. 너무 핫해. 일단은 행궁동에 공용 주차장이 크게 한 3개가 있습니다. 그 약간 좀 행궁동 안쪽에 그 3군데 다 주차를 할 수가 없어요. 주말에. 어제 특히 날씨가 너무 좋기도 했지만 진짜 수원시는 행궁동에다가 빨리 최대한 주차장을 건설을 확충을 하셔야 됩니다. 수원시는. 그리고 여러분들 행궁동 놀러 가시는 분들은 절대로 차를 끌고 가지 마세요. 행궁동은 택시를 이용하거나 지하철이나 대중교통을 이용해서 가시는 걸 추천드립니다. 진짜 주차가 그리고 오늘 날씨 너무 좋고요. 그리고 우리나라 대선이 2일 남았죠. 네, 3월 9일 대선이 2일 남았고 아직도 우크라이나와 러시아는 전쟁을 하고 있죠. 러시아가 첫 번째 채권이 3월 16일 날 국채 완료일이 3월 16일이랍니다. 앞으로 일주일 남았죠. 우리나라 대선 결과, 그 다음에 러시아의 디폴트, 주식시장이 어떻게 될지 아주 흥미진진합니다. 물론 뭐 비트코인 시장도 그렇고요. 역시 운동을 할 때 역시나 CNN입니다, 여러분.
Invaders. Here they're being begged by the control room over a public address system to stop their attack on the 6-reactor plant, the biggest in Europe. They say, "You are endangering the security of the entire world. Attention, stop shooting at a nuclear hazardous facility. Attention, stop it." There is now a disregard as much for nuclear safety as civilian lives in cities across the country being bombarded by Russia. Scenes like this have not been seen in Europe since the Second World War in the 20th century. The mass evacuation of civilians from a major city has been accelerated here because the people now believe, based on the evidence that they've seen elsewhere in Ukraine, that it is civilians who are now going to be targeted in Vladimir Putin's invasion.
When Russian troops came closer to Zaporizhia, I decided it was better to get my family out before they entered the city itself.
We hope that we can make it on the train today, because this morning people didn't let us in, even though we have a baby.
This is a wall that separates lovers and parts husbands from their wives, fathers from their families. Ukrainian men here between 18 and 60 cannot leave. They're needed for the fight. You're staying here?
Yes.
So this is goodbye, temporarily. Well, I hope in a week or two you can be back together again.
Дай Бог.
More than 1 million Ukrainians have fled their homeland so far, but more still are enduring these freezing conditions in the hope of a train to safety. But Mykola Tilchishin, who's 80, is staying on. He's a former paratrooper in the Soviet army.
I made Molotov cocktails. I have great rifles. I'm a hunter with 40 years of experience. I have a medal left from the USSR. I'm staying. I hate them. All the invaders because of this. Not to mention the fact that my grandson was bombed for a week in Kharkiv.
Those people who make it on board now face a 600-mile journey to Lviv. For those who don't, time and luck may be running out.
Sam, are many of the people you spoke with, are they staying in Lviv, or are they basically trying to get to Poland or Moldova or Romania?
And so most of them are hoping to get out of the country altogether. And of course, the scenes there that we saw were bad enough, but we've seen there's video and stills now emerging from Kharkiv, which is a town about 150 miles north of here, 75% of whom speak Russian as a first language. That has been hammered, absolutely hammered, in attacks on civilian areas. The train station there is a complete sea of people trying to get out, and they really, in the first instance, trying to get away from the immediate threat of bombing. Then the second, the threat potentially of some kind of radioactive nightmare if one of these nuclear power stations, and there's another one about 200 miles away that's under threat from the Russians, and then ultimately out of the country altogether so that the women and children can at least be safe. None of the men folk are able to leave unless they're old or very young, and they're all staying on to fight though, Anderson.
Yeah, and even some of the very old, as you saw in that piece from that incredibly brave man who was a former paratrooper in the USSR, Sam Kiley. Appreciate that. Joining us now, CNN military analyst and retired Army 3-star General Mark Hertling, also retired Army Brigadier General Peter Zwack. He's currently a global fellow at the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. General Hertling, the Wall Street Journal reported tonight that Russia's been recruiting troops from Syria to help take cities like Kyiv for urban combat. I mean, Russia obviously already has a substantial portion of its combat troops in Ukraine at this point. What does that tell you? I mean, if in fact that reporting is accurate, what does that tell you?
Tells me they're about to use some Syrian fighters from Syria as cannon fodder, Anderson. You know, you're seeing some great reporting by Clarissa Ward, Sam Kiley, Nick Pate-Walsh, and others who are showing how the Russians are truly establishing a new precedent of horrific destruction and human suffering. What isn't seen in those great reporting is what is happening with the Russian army. We are seeing, I think, from what I'm seeing, intelligence reports saying there are fewer airstrikes and even artillery strikes than the first couple days of this war. Russia is losing equipment en masse, and the casualty rates from killed, wounded, captured, and desertions are increasingly significant. You know, there was a report earlier today that said they fired 600 missiles. It struck me when I heard that they had fired 270 missiles on the first 2 days of the fight. We're now on day 11, so that tells me they're running out of supplies. What I've been saying all along is they are outrunning their logistics support. We're seeing fewer and fewer. When you have the Russians saying they're going to start recruiting the fighters out of Syria, which was a primary theater for Mr. Putin, it tells me they are running out of forces, and the next thing they could possibly do would be a general mobilization in Russia, and that would be horrific for Mr. Putin because he's already getting protests in the various cities throughout that country.
General Zwack, I saw a report, we haven't independently confirmed it, of Ukrainian officials telling defense forces, telling those who can attack, to not focus on convoys on armored personnel carriers per se if they don't have the weaponry, but instead to focus on gas trucks, apparently, which are not armored, and just somebody's driving the vehicle that has a lot of the fuel in. You destroy the fuel, you turn those tanks essentially static once they run out of fuel.
Yes, Anderson. I'd like to first address the report of 1,000 plus or minus foreign Syrian mercenaries. Okay. Kremlin does this. You think that the Ukrainians are fighting hard now? And they're going to introduce an alien host that will be seen as marauders and counter-partisan? If you do that, the Russians do that, and add the Chechens to it, the ferocity of the fight and the defense will, in my mind, it's hard to believe it would be greater, but it would. And the Russians at your own risk. Logistics, this is the key. This is the Achilles heel, because it doesn't take a modern javelin. You can take out truck columns with Kalashnikov rifles, RPG grenade launchers that have been around for 3 or 4 decades, and the Ukrainians have that. They're on these roads. They can't go off road because of the mud. These are real victims. This chops the legs out of the Russian offensive that might be all up front, but without logistics, without the ability to bring up your shells and your fuel, as you say, and oh, by the way, evacuate your wounded, because you got to come back the other way on the road. Evacuate your wounded and pick up more supplies. So I believe that this is the tactical to operational Achilles heel. The Russians are having a problem, and I believe that this is a partisan fight where they're anywhere. These assets are extremely vulnerable and targetable.
Anderson, if I could jump in, because you're showing a film of an artillery unit there, the film is displaying. It's a self-propelled artillery unit. Those things are towed by trucks. When you can destroy, they're a towed artillery unit. When you can destroy a self-propelled artillery unit, that's a big deal. Those are the guns on track vehicles, and they move under their own power. But the film you were showing a minute ago had towed artillery pieces. Those were put in place by towing them there with trucks. And what Peter just said is exactly right. What we have been saying all along, what true military operators have been saying all along, is logistics in this kind of fight is going to kill you. What will happen next? There will still be artillery strikes. There will still be airstrikes, to be sure, but they're lessening. And if Russia, according to their original plan, was going to attack Odessa, if they do that, that will be the end of their operations in the south, in my view, because they cannot sustain the amount of miles of logistics supply that they would need to sustain that attack over a frontage of 400 miles in the south, while at the same time continuing to go after the major cities in the north.
General Hertling, just very quickly, because we're really tight on time, but Ukraine wants planes. They want a no-fly zone. If they can't get that, regardless, they want planes. There's talk of Poland perhaps sending Soviet fighters that Ukrainians have already been trained on. How critical would that be? I mean, I don't know what numbers of Polish aircraft would potentially be sent, but how important would that be for Ukrainian forces?
Well, if you have the territorial guard going after the logistics, which they are, as Peter so adequately said, you then still have the artillery pieces, the tanks without fuel now, they suddenly become pillboxes, but they still have ammunition. So Putin is not going to surrender. So those vehicles with that amount of killing power are still going to be on the battlefield. So those aircrafts overflying those pieces of equipment will destroy those in mass. It will be sort of like the early days of Desert Storm when they were, as the Air Force called it, plinking tanks. When tanks are on the ground and they can't move in an environment where they're on the road, they're easy targets for the Air Force, and that's why these MiG-29 transports could be so critically important in getting at least air parity over Ukraine.
General Hertling, General Zwack, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Coming up next, a live report from Romania, which has already received more than 200,000 Ukrainian refugees, expecting many more. Later, a report from the neighborhood with no military presence anywhere nearby. That, however, did not stop the destruction.
와 진짜 지금 세상이 어떤 세상인데 와 아이도 저렇게 전쟁이 일어날 수 있다라는 와 하지만 북한은 절대 쳐들어오지 않죠. 왜냐면 북한은 러시아만큼 규제가 아니에요. 얻을 것도 없고.
This is the prison colony where Alexei Navalny has been interned. Yet, but you see these guards are waiting for us. We can't even register to be here. Are you happy with your president?
It's a very interesting question. I can't tell you the truth.
Would you take this opportunity to apologise to the people of Belarus for the human rights abuses that they've suffered at your hands? Is there a chance that the Russians could be planning an invasion? Of course. Well, there's very little sign of any side backing down. It's got blasted with a water cannon. We can't go any closer. There could be some interception by the Russians. Oh, good. As Russian forces pull back their troops, they're redeploying naval forces. More than these have been deployed try to be smart, but I want to hear authentic voices of people who are passionate, who are intelligent, and that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakar, TPS, Sunday on CNN.
Welcome to The Lead. We begin with breaking news. The United States has plunged into a recession. Seeing infections at an all-time high. What's your reaction to that? Here are the facts.
The Lead with Jay Tapper.
More than 1.5 million people, as you know, have now fled Ukraine, according to the UN, the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Many, as we've been seeing, are in Poland. Others have gone to Germany or gone on to Germany, where some were greeted at Berlin Central Station by strangers holding signs, offering them places to stay.
Vlad.
The volume of the exodus
Ukraine.
is staggering, and the speed with which it has suddenly grown. CNN's Miguel Marquez is in Romania, a country which in just days has grown in population by the equivalent of a medium-sized city. Miguel, more than 200,000 people now have come to Romania. How are they managing?
Yeah, it's shocking. They are managing by trying to move on from Romania to other parts of Western Europe. We can show you sort of how the process works here. This train has just arrived from sort of near the border. Many of the people here are coming into Bucharest here, this central station, for the first time, and they've set up several centers for the refugees who are coming here waiting for onward travel. This was a former fast food shop. It is now a refugee center. We spoke to one woman who had her 2 kids, her mother, the godmother of her kids here yesterday. She's a psychologist from Ukraine. She had a normal life 2 weeks ago. Now her life is turned inside out. What does the world need to know about what is happening in Ukraine right now?
That it is what has happened, that it is true. So
That what is true?
true that someone came to our city and there is no somewhere there is no city anymore, and there is not safe, that people need to go because they have their life in a country, and now all they need is just running away. So now I'm just a person who is running from her house.
So literally, she packed what bags she could, took the kids, took mom, took the godmother, and they are basically trying to get to Krakow, Poland now. They've left the station. We saw them last night. They've left the station. That's about a 10-hour train ride to the border with Slovakia. Romania is providing them that free of charge. Then they have to get from Slovakia to the Polish border, and then hopefully their friends in Krakow still have room for them. But that story is times 200,000 here. Most of the refugees coming into Romania are able to get out within a few days, maybe a week at the most, to places in Germany and other places around the world. Anderson?
Yeah, Miguel Marquez, I'm glad you're there in Bucharest. Thank you. Coming up next to some people who did not leave or could not leave. They lived in a village outside Kyiv, miles away from the nearest military target. That didn't matter. CNN's Alex Marquardt has more.
The small country road is now lined by piles of rubble, burned out cars, collapsed homes, and a deep crater where a Russian missile struck. The attack, caught on a village security camera, hit the home of Igor Mazhiev in the small village of Marhilivka, about 15 miles south of Kyiv, where he lived with his family. Now they're gone, killed in an instant. 5 family members and a friend, including his 12-year-old daughter, who was disabled in an accident with a drunk driver, his wife, just 46 years old, and his son-in-law, the father of his grandchildren.
Произошел сильный взрыв, и нас всех завалило. Дочка погибла в коляске. Меня вытащили, и двух внуков вытащили из-под завалов.
Today, Majiev, black eye and face bruised, picked through the debris, trying to find belongings and documents. There was a brief moment of happiness when he found one of his missing cats. But the reality of how his life is forever changed has not yet sunk in.
Никаких думок нема. Какие могут быть думки? Ужас. Ужас, да и все. Хочется уже скорее мира, да уже оставили, чтобы Украину в покое. Дай Бог, чтобы на этом уже все закончилось. Похороню завтра своих близких. Ну и все, не знаю, что дальше делать.
There is simply no explanation for all of this destruction, for the deaths that happened right here. There is no military target around for miles. This isn't a strategic village or town that needs taking. So as the Kremlin continues to deny that they are targeting civilians, it is indiscriminate attacks like this one that show the reality of what is going on here. Olga lives down the street. She points to a mat that was used to carry the children out of the rubble.
Головне, щоб побистріше закінчився це пекло, цей ад. Як так можливо, щоб брат на брата пішов? Це ж взагалі непостижимо. Там колись всі їздили, рідня.
It's too much for Olga and for millions across Ukraine who are in utter disbelief about what is happening to their home, praying and pleading for the violence to end. Alex Marquardt, CNN, Markhalivka, Ukraine.
And on it goes. Just ahead, there's new reporting on just how deeply involved the U.S. and Western allies are in the fight to arm Ukraine, also in the secret base in another country where supplies are being sent. We'll be right back.
여기까지.